The relentless sun beat down on Willow Creek, baking the earth to a brittle, cracked expanse. The once charming stream, which had given the town its name, was now little more than a dusty, winding scar through the landscape, its pebbles glinting mockingly in the oppressive heat. A pervasive sense of desolation hung heavy in the air, a silent, choking despair that seeped into every home and every heart. The town, perpetually parched, seemed to shrink further with each passing waterless day. Its residents, once cheerful and resilient, now moved with a weary resignation, their faces etched with the lines of desperation, their laughter replaced by anxious whispers about dwindling reserves and the relentless advance of the drought. In a quiet, overlooked corner of the parched town square, amidst the wilted flower beds and the empty bird baths, sat Elias Thorne. He was an old man, perhaps in his late 60s or early 70s, his frame slight, almost fragile, his movements slow and deliberate. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles, held an expression of perpetual melancholia. His eyes, once probably bright, now seemed to gaze inward, lost in distant memories. Elias was a street performer, a violinist, though few truly noticed him. He played the same mournful, reedy tunes day after day, melodies that seemed to echo the town's own sorrow, coaxing thin, wavering notes from his ancient instrument. Passers-by rarely stopped, their footsteps hurried, their gazes averted, as if his quiet presence was just another sad reminder of Willow Creek's decline. His meager earnings, a few coins tossed into his open violin case, barely covered his solitary, frugal meals. He lived a life of quiet routine, his days marked by the same slow walk from his secluded cottage by the old cemetery to his spot in the square, and back again, his only constant companion the faint hum of unspoken thoughts. Elias always carried a worn, faded handkerchief, embroidered with a delicate, almost illegible E. He would often absent-mindedly run his thumb over the stitching during pauses in his music, a private gesture of comfort. It was a tangible link to a past he rarely spoke of, a life that seemed utterly disconnected from his current, humble existence. One sweltering afternoon, as Elias was midway through a particularly somber piece, a sudden commotion erupted near the edge of the square. A flash of black fur darted past, followed by the jeering shouts of a group of boisterous children. A small, scrawny black cat, clearly a stray, hobbled by, its left paw dragging at an awkward angle, a thin trail of blood marking its path. The children, oblivious to its pain, continued their chase, their cruel laughter echoing in the suffocating heat. Elias stopped playing mid-note. His melancholic eyes, usually so withdrawn, sharpened with an unexpected tenderness. Without a moment's hesitation, he gently lowered his violin to the ground, abandoning his performance. He rose slowly, his old bones creaking, and shuffled towards the injured creature. The children, surprised by his intervention, paused their pursuit, watching with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. Kneeling carefully, Elias extended a gnarled hand, murmuring soft, soothing words. The cat, terrified and in pain, hissed and recoiled, its green eyes wide with fear. But Elias didn't flinch. He continued to speak in hushed tones, his voice a low, comforting rumble. Slowly, tentatively, the cat stopped hissing, its fear giving way to cautious curiosity. Elias then reached into his pocket, retrieved his worn handkerchief, and with surprising gentleness, he tore a clean strip from it. He carefully, meticulously, wrapped the makeshift bandage around the cat's injured paw, his movements slow and deliberate, a silent promise of care. When he was done, he stroked its head once, then slowly stood, leaving the cat to lick its now bandaged paw, watching him with wary gratitude. The children, chastened by his quiet compassion, slowly dispersed, their laughter muted. Elias simply returned to his violin. His performance resumed, leaving a profound sense of quiet dignity in his wake. This small, unsolicited act of kindness, performed without fanfare, was Elias's save the cat moment, a silent testament to the deep well of empathy and gentle spirit that resided within him, assuring any discerning observer that this unassuming old man possessed a heart of profound worth. Beneath his threadbare coat, perpetually hidden from view, Elias wore an old, tarnished brass necklace. At its center hung a deep blue, almost black gemstone, dull and unremarkable at first glance. But if the light caught it just right, a faint, milky asterism, a ghostly six-rayed star, seemed to shimmer within its depths, a symbol of something ancient, something called the Star of Eldoria. Elias would sometimes, unconsciously, reach beneath his coat, and his fingers would brush against the cool, smooth stone. When he did, his eyes would grow distant, filled with a profound, almost aching sadness, and his fingers, resting on the violin strings, would subtly trace the contours of a melody far grander, far more intricate and powerful than the simple tunes he usually played. It was a fleeting, internal symphony, a whisper of a forgotten mastery. But the moment he sensed anyone approaching, or felt a gaze linger on him, his hand would instantly retract, the necklace tucked back beneath his coat, the musical imagining fading like smoke. This subtle, habitual gesture, coupled with the glimpse of the hidden jewel, hinted at a concealed past, a talent dismissed, and a secret waiting to be unveiled. Willow Creek itself, once a picturesque, idyllic town, was slowly succumbing to the creeping blight of the drought. The once bustling town square, with its fading paint on storefronts and the cracking sidewalks, had taken on a forlorn air. The local well, once a reliable source of clear, cold water, now yielded only a sluggish, metallic-tasting trickle. The air, usually fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth, was now thick with dust and the oppressive quiet of dying foliage. The town's despair had become palpable, a silent collective groan. Its citizens, once proud and self-sufficient, had grown increasingly irritable, distrustful, and desperate, their patience worn thin by the relentless heat and the ever-present threat of complete desiccation. They were easy prey for anyone promising a quick fix, a desperate community ripe for exploitation, unknowingly teetering on the precipice of a crisis far deeper than mere thirst. The oppressive quiet of Willow Creek was a constant, broken only by the dry rustle of parched leaves and the distant mournful creak of an old windmill. But one sweltering afternoon, a new sound began to permeate the air, the amplified, booming voice of Mayor Robert Finch. He stood on a makeshift platform in the town square, his usually jovial face now grim, sweat plastering his thinning hair to his forehead. Flanked by grim-faced council members, he delivered the news that everyone had dreaded. The town well, their last reliable source of water, was almost completely dry. The drought, once a distant threat, had clamped its iron fist firmly around Willow Creek's throat. "My fellow citizens," Mayor Finch announced, his voice heavy with forced solemnity, "we are facing an unprecedented crisis. Our water reserves are critically low. We need a long-term solution, a modern solution, to save our town." Then a new figure stepped forward, radiating an aura of confident, almost arrogant brilliance. This was Dr. Eris Thorne, a man in his late 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the heat. His dark, sharp eyes swept over the desperate crowd, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Dr. Thorne was a celebrated hydrologist and engineer, a prodigy lauded in scientific journals, and, though the town did not yet know it, Elias's estranged nephew. Eris had a cutting intellect and an insatiable ambition, but he carried a deep-seated resentment for his family's outdated traditions, particularly the ancient knowledge passed down through generations of Thorns, a knowledge that Elias still quietly honored. "Good people of Willow Creek," Eris began, his voice smooth, authoritative, and laced with a subtle condescension. "Your mayor has consulted with me, and I have devised a comprehensive plan. It involves deep earth drilling and advanced geological surveys to tap into entirely new aquifers. This will be a multi-year project. Expensive, yes, but necessary. It will require strict water rationing, further taxes, and considerable patience." He paused, letting his words sink in, then added with a dismissive wave of his hand, "Forget the old wives' tales, the superstitions about ancient springs or hidden currents. Those are the delusions of a bygone era. We rely on science here, on progress, not on some old man waving a stick." His gaze, sharp and disdainful, flickered for a fraction of a second towards Elias, who sat quietly on his bench at the edge of the crowd, his violin resting on his knees. Elias Thorne felt a cold dread trickle down his spine, far colder than the oppressive heat. He knew, with an ancient, visceral certainty, that Eris was wrong. He knew about the deep, pure aquifer that lay directly beneath Willow Creek, a sacred spring known only to his ancestors. It wasn't superstition. It was profound, inherited knowledge, passed down through generations of thorns, guardians of the land and its unseen waters. The thought of Aris, his own kin, exploiting the town's despair with an elaborate, unnecessary, and likely fraudulent scheme, twisted in Elias's gut. He had tried to reach out to Aris years ago, tried to share the wisdom of their lineage, but Aris had scoffed, dismissing it as primitive nonsense, embracing modern science with a zealous contempt for tradition. A wave of despair washed over Elias. He saw the resignation in the faces of the townsfolk, the way they seemed to cling to Aris's every word, desperate for any shred of hope. He tried to rise, to speak, to offer his forgotten knowledge, but his throat felt thick, choked by a lifetime of silence and the suffocating weight of his past. The memories of his failures, of how his family's unique knowledge had been dismissed as eccentricities, now tied his tongue. His first instinct was to retreat, to disappear back into his quiet corner, to avoid confrontation as he always had. The very thought of public speaking, of contradicting a celebrated scientist, filled him with a crippling anxiety. He was an old, forgotten man. Who would listen to him? Yet, as Eris Thorn continued to pontificate, his words dripping with contempt for anything not sanctioned by his modern science, something shifted within Elias. The subtle contempt in Eris's tone, the gleam of avarice in his eyes, awakened a long-dormant fire. This wasn't just about money. It was about the desecration of his ancestral land, the betrayal of innocent people, and the willful blindness to a profound truth. He couldn't let Eris, his own blood, destroy Willow Creek for profit. This was no longer just about his private life. It was about the very lifeblood of the town. The spark of defiance, so rarely seen, flickered within him, fueled by a deep sense of responsibility and a quiet, burning rage. He would not stand by and watch his home and its people be exploited by his greedy, arrogant nephew. As the meeting drew to a close, a young woman, Sarah Jenkins, a beloved local schoolteacher, known for her sharp intellect and compassionate heart, stepped forward. She had always harbored a quiet skepticism about Eris Thorn, finding his charisma a little too slick, his promises a little too grand. She had seen Elias play his violin, and something in his quiet dignity had always resonated with her, suggesting a depth far beyond what most people perceived. "Dr. Thorn," Sarah asked, her voice clear and steady, "given the urgency of our situation, how quickly can we expect to see tangible results? And what if your deep earth drilling is unsuccessful?" Eris Thorn flashed a condescending smile. "My dear Ms. Jenkins, my methods are foolproof. I guarantee results." He then puffed out his chest, his eyes scanning the crowd, seeking to amplify his own importance. His gaze landed on Elias, still sitting quietly, stroking his necklace. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked by disdain, crossed Aris's face. He knew of Elias's peculiar knowledge, their shared lineage, and the old ways that Aris had so vehemently rejected. For Aris, Elias was a living relic, a humiliating reminder of a past he despised. And now, he saw a chance to publicly crush this reminder. "In fact," Aris declared, his voice ringing with challenge, "to prove the superiority of modern science over folk tales," he paused, letting his gaze linger pointedly on Elias. "I will make you a public promise. I, Dr. Eris Thorn, will begin my initial survey work tomorrow morning. I guarantee to find a viable new water source within 60 minutes of beginning my survey, or I will pack my bags, leave Willow Creek forever, and forgo any claim to the project's fees." He smirked, confident in his abilities and the ignorance of the crowd. Then his eyes, alight with malice and an old simmering resentment, fixed directly on Elias. "Unless, of course, our resident diviner," he spat the word like an insult. "Our old wizard with his stick and his superstitious mumbo-jumbo believes he can do better? Perhaps our esteemed Mr. Thorn here believes he can wave his magic wand and make water appear where my science cannot. I challenge you, old man. You claim to know the land, the hidden springs. Prove it. Find water in 60 minutes, or you too leave Willow Creek forever. Let's see whose knowledge truly holds water." A stunned silence fell over the town square. The clock on the old church tower seemed to tick louder, each second echoing with the weight of the impossible challenge. Elias, suddenly the focal point of every gaze, felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. Eris's words, a direct public assault on his very being, had pushed him past his breaking point. This wasn't just a dare. It was a personal affront, a challenge to his heritage, and a cruel gamble with the fate of Willow Creek. He looked at Eris, his nephew, whose eyes gleamed with a chilling mixture of arrogance and a deep, unsettling malice. Elias knew, in that single, profound moment, that he had reached the point of no return. He could not retreat. He could not hide. This was the only way to save Willow Creek, to expose Eris, and to finally vindicate the ancient, forgotten truths he carried within him. His trembling hand, almost instinctively, reached beneath his coat, his fingers closing around the smooth, cool surface of the Star of Eldoria necklace. The quiet man was about to step into the light. The challenge hung in the sweltering air of Willow Creek's town square, a stark gauntlet thrown down by the arrogant Dr. Eris Thorne. His words, dripping with scorn, had pierced Elias Thorne's carefully constructed shell of anonymity, forcing the quiet old man into the harsh glare of the public spotlight. A tense hush fell over the gathered townsfolk, their eyes flicking between the smug, impeccably dressed scientist and the unassuming street performer. Could this old man, with his mournful violin and faded coat, truly possess the knowledge to save them from the encroaching drought? Or was he merely a fool, about to be publicly humiliated? Elias, still seated on his worn bench, slowly rose. The crowd parted instinctively, creating an aisle for him. He moved with a quiet dignity, his gaze fixed not on Eris, but on the parched earth beneath his feet. He carried no fancy equipment, no geological sensors or complex mapping devices. In one hand, he held only a simple, forked willow branch, its bark smooth and worn from countless years of handling, a testament to its ancient purpose. In the other, he clutched a tarnished brass compass, the kind that belonged in a forgotten explorer's kit, its needle seemingly lifeless until held by Elias. This was the legendary dowsing rod and the compass, a tool for discerning the subtle energies of the earth, the only instruments of his ancestral craft. "I accept your challenge, Eris," Elias said, his voice surprisingly clear, though still soft, carrying a resonance that cut through the stifling heat. It was the first time many in Willow Creek had heard him speak more than a murmur. "But I will not play your game of modern science against folk tales. I will simply show you the truth." A ripple of nervous excitement mixed with deep skepticism swept through the crowd. Eris Thorne let out a derisive snort, his laughter echoing unnervingly. "The truth, old man? The truth is you're a charlatan, a relic of a bygone era, clinging to superstitions while this town dies of thirst." He turned to Mayor Finch, whose face was a mixture of concern and a growing sense of unease. "Mr. Mayor, you cannot possibly allow this charade to continue. It's making a mockery of our dire situation." Mayor Finch, caught between the influential Dr. Thorne and the sudden, unexpected defiance of Elias, stammered, "Well, Dr. Thorne, a challenge was issued and accepted. Let him have his 60 minutes. What harm can it do?" He still harbored considerable doubt, but a sliver of curiosity, perhaps even a desperate hope, had been piqued. The giant clock face on the town hall was immediately projected onto a large temporary screen erected for Dr. Thorne's presentation, and the 60-minute countdown began, stark red numbers ticking away the precious seconds. Elias, ignoring the jeers and the ticking clock, closed his eyes for a moment. He reached under his coat, his fingers briefly brushing the cool, smooth surface of the Star of Eldoria necklace, drawing strength from its hidden power. When he opened his eyes, they held a new, focused intensity, as if he could see beyond the parched surface of the earth. He held the willow branch out in front of him, its fork pointing forward, his hands gripping it lightly. He began to walk, slowly, deliberately, across the dusty town square, his brass compass clutched in his other hand. As he walked, the willow branch, initially still, began to tremble. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor at first, then a more pronounced quiver, until it seemed to tug downwards with a will of its own, pulling Elias subtly to the left, towards the oldest, most neglected part of the town square, near the ancient crumbling wall of the old cemetery. Dr. Eris Thorne, watching Elias's every move, saw the trembling branch. A flash of something unreadable, a mixture of contempt and a flicker of deep-seated fear, crossed his face. He knew of the Thorne family's gift, a sensitivity to underground currents, a skill he had ruthlessly suppressed in himself and ridiculed in his uncle. But to see it in action, to witness the undeniable pull of the dowsing rod in Elias's hands, sent a chill through him, a primal fear that his carefully constructed world of scientific certainty and lucrative deception was about to crumble. He focused on the necklace peeking from under Elias's coat, the Star of Eldoria. He knew what that meant, and that knowledge fueled his fury. "Look at him!" Aris scoffed, his voice loud, desperate to regain control. "He's just an old fool, wandering aimlessly. This is ridiculous. He's trying to distract you with his parlor tricks while our town burns." He began to shout at Elias, "Give it up, old man. You're making a fool of yourself. Go back to your beggarly tunes." Aris even deliberately dropped a few loose stones near Elias's feet, hoping to startle him, to break his concentration. Mayor Robert Finch, initially skeptical, watched Elias with a growing unease. He had dismissed the dowsing rod as quaint superstition, but the way the branch seemed to pull, almost independently, in Elias's hands, was unsettling. He cast a wary glance at Aris, whose outburst now seemed less like confident dismissal and more like desperate fear. The mayor's own pride was on the line, but a flicker of doubt about Aris's true intentions began to surface. But there was one observer who watched with an entirely different emotion: Sarah Jenkins. The young teacher had felt a pull towards Elias's quiet dignity from the start, a sense that there was more to him than met the eye. Now, as she saw the willow branch respond and witnessed Aris Thorne's increasingly agitated and unprofessional behavior, her initial skepticism vanished, replaced by a surge of hope and a blossoming conviction. Her eyes were fixed on Elias, a silent prayer of encouragement in her heart. She was the first to truly believe. Elias continued his slow, deliberate pace, his eyes closed once more, a profound concentration etched on his face. The willow branch now vibrated violently, tugging downwards with surprising force, pulling him towards a particularly barren patch of ground near an ancient, crumbling wall where gnarled roots of a dead oak clawed at the dry earth. The brass compass in his hand, previously inert, now spun wildly, then settled, its needle pointing directly down, humming faintly. Aris Thorne, seeing Elias nearing a specific spot, panicked. He knew that area. It was too close to where his own initial, more rudimentary surveys had shown a deep, pure aquifer. He had quickly dismissed it, knowing his modern project would be far more profitable. Now, he saw his scheme unraveling. "He's found nothing," Aris bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "He's just digging in the dirt. This is a waste of time. A trick." He turned to the crowd, his voice pleading. "Don't let him deceive you. He's just an old man with a stick. He knows nothing. Call this off, Mayor. Call it off before he makes a fool of us all." He even physically attempted to block Elias's path, trying to force him away from the spot, but Elias, with surprising agility, sidestepped him, his focus unwavering. The crowd began to murmur, their hope wavering under Aris's relentless assault. The red numbers on the screen continued their merciless countdown. 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes. Doubt, like the drought itself, crept back into their hearts. Elias was now alone in the center of a silent, skeptical circle, facing down not just Aris Thorne, but the collective doubt of a desperate town and the relentless, unforgiving march of time. He knew this was the moment. The unveiling was at hand, and with it, either Willow Creek's salvation or his own final crushing defeat. He dropped to his knees, his old hands reaching for the dry earth ready to dig. The old cemetery, normally a place of quiet solitude, had transformed into a crucible, a stage for Willow Creek's ultimate test. The air, thick with dust and the collective anxieties of the townsfolk, crackled with an almost palpable tension. The relentless red numbers on the giant screen above the town hall mercilessly ticked down. 00, 000947, 000946, 00945. Each second was a hammer blow, striking at the fragile hope Elias Thorne had ignited. Elias knelt on the parched earth before the ancient, crumbling wall of the cemetery, near the gnarled roots of a long-dead oak. The willow branch in his hands vibrated violently, tugging downwards with an insistent force, pulling him towards a small, unmarked patch of ground. His brow was furrowed in concentration, beads of sweat mingling with the dust on his skin. He began to dig, not with a shovel, but with his bare, calloused hands, clawing at the hardened soil, his movements slow and agonizingly deliberate. Every scrape of his fingers against the dirt felt loud in the oppressive silence. Dr. Eris Thorne, a sneer twisting his lips, paced impatiently nearby, his expensive shoes crunching on the dry leaves. He reveled in Elias's struggle, seeing his uncle's impending failure as his own vindication. "Look at him!" Eris scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "The great water finder resorting to digging in the dirt like a desperate dog. What a spectacle! This is what your ancient wisdom amounts to, old man. Filth and despair." He looked at Mayor Finch and the increasingly restless crowd. 5 minutes left, Mayor. Are we going to let this charade continue? He's clearly found nothing but dry earth and disappointment. The crowd, their faces etched with desperation, shifted uneasily. Whispers, initially hopeful, now turned to murmurs of doubt. "He's just an old man," one person muttered. "We need real solutions, not magic tricks," another added, their voices tinged with a bitterness born of prolonged suffering. The silence of the graveyard seemed to amplify their collective skepticism, their hopes slowly dying with each passing second on the countdown clock. Elias was utterly alone. Mr. Davies, the local store owner who had initially offered a shovel, had retreated, his face pale with embarrassment, unable to withstand Eris's sneers. Even Sarah Jenkins, who had been a beacon of belief, now watched with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, though her faith in Elias remained unshaken. She knew Aris's cruel words were designed to break him, to make him give up. She saw the exhaustion on Elias's face, the trembling in his old hands, and she wished she could offer him more than just her silent support. Elias felt the immense weight of the town's hope and their growing despair pressing down on him. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the satisfaction in Eris's. He felt the insidious grip of despair beginning to tighten its icy fingers around his own heart. Had he been wrong? Had the ancient knowledge passed down through generations finally failed him? Was he truly just an old fool, clinging to outdated superstitions? The memories of past failures, of his family's gift being dismissed, swirled in his mind, threatening to overwhelm him. He scraped deeper, his fingers aching, raw, finding nothing but dry, unforgiving soil. The red numbers glared. 0, 2, 15. 0, 2, 14. The pressure mounted, crushing him. Eris's laughter, sharp and triumphant, seemed to echo in his ears. "Time's up, old man. You've failed. Willow Creek is doomed because of your folly." Just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to extinguish completely, a faint scratching sound came from behind Elias. It was Shadow, the small black cat Elias had helped. The cat, its bandaged paw still slightly stiff, had followed him. Now, it was digging furiously at the base of the crumbling wall, right beside the dead oak, directly where the willow branch had pulled Elias, but a few feet deeper than he had managed to dig with his bare hands. The animal's frantic, desperate scratching seemed to scream urgency. Elias, startled, looked at the cat, then at the willow branch, which was now vibrating with an almost violent intensity, its tip practically hammering against the earth where Shadow was digging. His brass compass spun wildly, then locked, its needle pointing not at the ground where he was digging, but precisely at the spot where the cat scratched. A new surge of energy, fueled by this unexpected animalistic validation, coursed through him. This was it. This was the sign. He turned, ignoring Eris's jeers, and began to dig with renewed, desperate fervor at the spot indicated by Shadow and the compass. His fingernails tore, his knuckles scraped against unseen rocks. He felt a sudden give in the earth, a softer, damper patch. He dug faster, his old heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Suddenly, his fingers brushed against something cold, metallic and smooth. A pipe. Not just any pipe, but one that felt strangely out of place, almost ancient, embedded deep beneath the ground. He traced its length, feeling a distinct rupture, a jagged break in its surface. And from this break, a thin, almost invisible trickle of moisture, cool and earthy, began to seep. 0030, 0029. The crowd leaned forward, their skepticism wavering, replaced by a dawning, fragile hope. Aris Thorn, his face contorted in a sneer, moved closer, eager to witness Elias's final, humiliating failure. But as Elias continued to clear the earth around the broken pipe, Aris's eyes widened. He saw the peculiar material of the pipe, the ancient carving on its surface, a stylized, flowing water symbol. And then he saw what Elias was about to uncover, something that sent a surge of pure, unadulterated terror through him. His carefully constructed lie, his grand scheme, was about to be obliterated by a truth he had desperately tried to bury. He knew that pipe. He knew what it meant. And he knew his reign of deception was about to end. The final, agonizing seconds of the countdown clock loomed, a scarlet judgment against Elias Thorn. The air in the old cemetery vibrated with an almost unbearable tension. 0105, 0004. Dr. Aris Thorn, his face twisted in a sneer of triumph, edged closer, ready to deliver the final crushing blow of his verbal assault. The crowd, a silent, grim jury, watched with bated breath, preparing for the inevitable failure. Elias, oblivious to everything but the urgent promptings of the willow branch and the frantic scratching of Shadow the cat, dug deeper. His raw fingers, bleeding from the effort, scraped against what felt like a solid mass. Then, with a desperate heave, he dislodged a section of earth, revealing not the expected gush of water, but a section of old, corroded pipe. And from a jagged fissure in its surface, a thin, oily stream of black, foul-smelling liquid began to seep, staining the dry earth. A collective groan of disappointment swept through the onlookers. "It's tainted!" someone cried out, their voice laced with despair. "Even worse than before!" Aris Thorn let out a booming, triumphant laugh that echoed through the graveyard, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "There! You see, Mayor? You see, everyone!" he shrieked, pointing a theatrical finger at the black ooze. "His ancient wisdom has only found death and decay. He's a fraud, a charlatan. Willow Creek is doomed because of this old man's foolishness." He turned to Elias, his eyes blazing with pure malice. "You failed, Uncle Elias. You were always a fool, clinging to your childish myths. Now pack your bags and leave Willow Creek just as you promised." Elias, however, did not flinch. He stared at the dark liquid, then at the broken pipe. His mind, usually slow and reflective, snapped into sharp focus. He noticed the faint, yet distinct pattern etched into the surface of the pipe beneath the corrosion, a series of interlocking spirals, symbols of flowing water from an ancient past. And then his gaze shifted to his brass compass, which had been furiously spinning before locking onto this precise spot. The needle, usually a guide to natural underground currents, was now vibrating erratically, pointing at something unnatural, something interfering with the true flow. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't a natural seepage. This was a deliberate obstruction. This was poison. Then, his gaze fell upon a small, discolored lump of clay, barely visible amongst the unearthed dirt near the broken pipe. Buried within it was a tiny, desiccated packet, its fragile paper disintegrating as he touched it. He recognized the crude, yet cunning design of the packet. It was a makeshift container, designed to slowly release its contents into the pipe over time. A wave of chilling realization washed over him, a truth far more sinister than mere greed. Elias looked up, his eyes locking with Aris Thorn's. A flicker of sheer terror, quickly masked by defiance, crossed Aris's face. He knew what Elias had found. He had engineered this. The broken pipe, the black liquid, the packet. It was all part of a monstrous scheme not just to profit from Willow Creek's thirst, but to systematically destroy their natural water source, making his modern solution the only viable option. This isn't natural, Elias said, his voice low, a tremor of outrage in his usually calm tone. He held up the packet for everyone to see. This pipe was intentionally broken, and this packet, this is what was releasing the contaminants. He looked at Eris, his voice rising, gaining a surprising power. You didn't just drain our water, Eris. You poisoned it. A gasp swept through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. Their faces, previously etched with despair, contorted into expressions of shock, then horror, and finally, burning rage. They stared at the black ooze, then at the tiny, insidious packet in Elias's hand, a sudden, horrifying understanding dawning upon them. This wasn't just a drought, it was a deliberate act of sabotage. Eris Thorne, seeing his carefully constructed facade crumbling, lunged forward, a desperate, animalistic cry escaping his lips. You old fool! You know nothing. Give me that. It's a trick. He's faking it. He tried to snatch the packet, but Elias, with an unexpected surge of agility born of righteous anger, sidestepped him. Then, from the now exposed break in the pipe, a miracle began to unfold. A thin, silvery trickle of clear, pure water began to emerge, slowly at first, then gaining momentum, bubbling up from the earth beneath the ruptured, poisoned section. It was pristine, crystal clear, catching the sunlight like liquid diamonds, a stark contrast to the black sludge that had preceded it. It was the ancient aquifer, finally unleashed. The Star of Eldoria necklace, suddenly exposed as Elias moved, shimmered, reflecting the pure water with an almost supernatural light. The crowd watched, stunned. Their mouths fell open. The murmurs died. The ticking of the clock, now a mere afterthought, faded into irrelevance. The pure water flowed, glistening, expanding into a small, clear puddle around Elias's knees. Shadow, the black cat, dipped its head into the clear water, lapping eagerly, then looked up at Elias with eyes filled with silent gratitude. Mayor Robert Finch, his face a sickly shade of green, stumbled backward. He had been so easily manipulated, so blind to the true evil festering in their midst. His initial skepticism of Elias, his trust in Eris, now felt like a lead weight in his stomach. The realization of how close they had come to drinking poisoned water, how Eris had played them all for fools, filled him with a potent mixture of shame and fury. "My God," the mayor whispered, his voice hoarse. "He poisoned us. All this time." Eris Thorne, his face contorted into a mask of pure terror, saw the dawning wrath in the crowd's eyes. He saw the pure water, bubbling up from the earth, undeniable proof of his treachery. He knew he was exposed, ruined, facing far more than just a failed project. He was facing the wrath of a betrayed town. He tried to bolt, to escape into the bewildered crowd. But the townsfolk, now fully awake to his deceit, surged forward, their faces contorted with raw, visceral anger. "He poisoned Lily Evans," a woman shrieked from the crowd, her voice cracking with grief and rage. "My daughter, she drank from the well. He killed her." The cry ripped through the cemetery, igniting the crowd's fury. The death of Lily Evans, a child who had fallen ill and died unexpectedly a few years prior, had been attributed to a rare illness. A tragic mystery. Now the horrifying truth crashed down upon them. Eris's experiments, his desire to prove his methods superior by eliminating the natural source, had cost a life. Eris was quickly surrounded, his desperate attempts to flee thwarted by angry hands. He screamed, not in defiance, but in abject terror, as the crowd, a unified tide of righteous anger, surged towards him. Elias, kneeling in the gushing pure water, watched Eris's desperate struggles. He felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness for the path his nephew had chosen. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cool, clear water wash over his bloodied hands. When he opened them, the Star of Eldoria on his neck pulsed with a faint inner light, reflecting the truth that had finally surfaced. The cheers erupted, a thunderous roar of vindication and relief, as the pure water continued to gush from the earth, filling the broken pipe and overflowing onto the dry ground. The people of Willow Creek, from stunned disbelief to raw, undeniable satisfaction, from desperate fear to overwhelming joy, now turned their gaze from the disgraced heiress to the unassuming old man kneeling in the flowing water. Their faces, previously drawn and anxious, broke into a collective, awestruck grin. They rushed forward, not to threaten, but to cheer, to offer helping hands, to express their profound gratitude. Elias Thorne, the quiet street performer, had not only found the water, but had also exposed a monstrous lie, saving their town and revealing the chilling truth behind an innocent child's death. The master storyteller had orchestrated a perfect climax, allowing the audience to feel the full weight of Elias's triumph and the bitter downfall of his treacherous antagonist, all while weaving in the most unexpected, harrowing truth. The raw, primal fury that had gripped the crowd in the old cemetery slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a stunned, simmering indignation as the pure, life-giving water continued to gush from the rediscovered spring. The cheers for Elias, initially a roar, softened into a murmuring hum of awe and gratitude. Dr. Eris Thorne, his face still a mask of terror and disbelief, was quickly subdued by the townsfolk who had surged forward. They held him firmly until the two police officers, who had been witnessing the entire unfolding drama with growing astonishment, formally placed him under arrest. "Eris Thorne," Officer Miller stated, his voice devoid of emotion as he clicked the handcuffs shut around Eris's wrists. "You are being arrested on suspicion of filing a false report, slander, obstruction of justice, and tampering with a public water supply, among other potential charges. You have the right to remain silent." Eris, stripped of his arrogance, was no longer the confident scientist. He was a whimpering, pathetic figure, his grand schemes and meticulously crafted lies exposed for all to see. He had lost everything: his reputation, his freedom, and any semblance of respect. The whispers of Lily Evans's name, now linked to his heinous act, followed him like a haunting echo as he was led away, his expensive suit now rumpled and soiled by the very earth he had sought to defile. The legal process, fueled by the irrefutable security footage from the town hall screen showing Eris's calculated deception, Elias's clear testimony, and the undeniable evidence of the poisoned pipe, moved swiftly. Eris Thorne faced severe charges, not just for fraud, but for endangering an entire community, and, potentially, for a child's death. His downfall was absolute, a fitting end for a man consumed by avarice and a twisted, envious desire to erase his family's true legacy. Back at the now gushing spring, a humbled Mayor Robert Finch stood before Elias, his usual bluster replaced by a profound sense of shame. His face was pale, his eyes downcast. He had been so quick to dismiss Elias, so eager to embrace the modern solutions offered by Eris Thorne, blinded by his own ambition and a desire to appear progressive. Now the weight of his error pressed down on him. "Mr. Thorne," the mayor began, his voice barely a whisper. "Elias, I don't know what to say. I was foolish. I was arrogant. I let my pride, and Dr. Thorne's impressive credentials, blind me to the truth. I dismissed your knowledge, your wisdom, and I endangered this entire town. I am profoundly, deeply sorry. To you, and to all the people of Willow Creek." He looked up, his eyes meeting Elias's. The mayor was a man who genuinely cared about his town, but had allowed himself to be swayed by external pressures and a lack of true discernment. His apology felt raw, honest, and truly remorseful. Elias, still kneeling by the bubbling spring, simply nodded. He saw the genuine regret in the mayor's eyes, the crushing weight of his realization. He understood. "The thirst of the land can blind us, Mayor," Elias said, his voice soft, yet carrying the quiet authority of experience. "But the land, it remembers, and it forgives, if we are willing to listen." Mayor Finch, immensely relieved by Elias's quiet acceptance, swallowed hard. "Elias, what you have done for Willow Creek, it's immeasurable. We were so lost. We want to make amends. I want to offer you a formal position, a consultant to the town, to oversee our water resources, to teach us what you know. We need your wisdom, Elias, not just for this spring, but for the future of Willow Creek. And we want to compensate you for your time, for your incredible gift." He was not just offering a job. He was offering public acknowledgement, respect, and a chance for Elias to finally share the knowledge he had so long kept hidden. Elias considered the offer. His life had been one of quiet solitude, a deliberate retreat from the spotlight. But the events of the day, the sheer desperation he had witnessed, and the malicious intent of his nephew had awakened something within him. His gift, his inherited knowledge, was not just for him. It was meant to serve. He looked at the pure water bubbling from the earth, and at the hopeful, grateful faces of the townsfolk. "I will accept the position, Mayor," Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Not for the compensation, but for Willow Creek. The water is a gift, and it must be tended with respect. And the knowledge, it should be shared, so that this never happens again." He paused, then added, "But I ask that the first act of the town, once the spring is fully flowing, is to dedicate a small memorial for Lily Evans, and to purify the ground where the old well stood for any lingering contamination." The mayor, his eyes wet with emotion, immediately agreed. The news of the ancient spring's rediscovery and the exposé of Eris Thorne's treachery spread quickly beyond Willow Creek. Elias Thorne, once the unnoticed street performer, became a quiet legend. Journalists flocked to the town, eager to hear the story of the water whisperer of Willow Creek. Elias, with Sarah Jenkins's gentle encouragement, granted a few interviews, sharing the ancient wisdom of his family, speaking of the interconnectedness of land and water, and the importance of respecting nature's delicate balance. Later that week, as the initial euphoria subsided and the new spring began to flow steadily, Elias sat with Sarah Jenkins on a bench overlooking the now lush town square. The air was cleaner, fresher, tinged with the scent of damp earth and new growth. Shadow, the black cat, now a permanent fixture at Elias's side, purred contentedly on his lap. "You were so brave, Elias," Sarah said, her voice soft with admiration. "So steadfast, even when everyone doubted you, even when Eris was at his worst." Elias chuckled softly, a rare, genuine sound. "Brave? No, Sarah. Desperate, perhaps. But it was Shadow who truly showed me the way. And you were the first to truly believe. That gave me strength." He ran a gnarled finger over the Star of Eldoria necklace, which he now wore openly, allowing its subtle shimmer to catch the sunlight. This is the Star of Eldoria, a symbol of our family, of the water diviners. It was passed down through generations. My brother, Eris's father, he was meant to carry on the tradition, but he chose a different path. And Eris, he rejected it completely. He saw it as a weakness, an embarrassment, something to be exploited, not honored. A shadow of old pain crossed Elias's face. After the incident with Lily Evans, when Eris first experimented with the old well, trying to prove that the traditional sources were failing, he inadvertently contaminated it. He covered it up, blamed it on an unknown pathogen, and twisted the narrative to push for his modern solutions. It broke my heart. I tried to warn him, tried to show him the truth of the land, but he would not listen. He was so consumed by his own ambition, his need to be scientifically superior, that he became blind to everything else. I retreated then, Sarah. I saw what greed and misplaced ambition could do, even to those of our own blood. I lived in fear of being exposed, of bringing shame to our ancient ways. I thought it was safer to be forgotten. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a newfound clarity. But Willow Creek, it needed me. And in the end, it was not the old wisdom alone, but the pure heart of a child and the innocent faith of an animal that truly led me to the truth. I realized that day that running away, hiding my gift, was no longer an option. The burden of knowledge is also the burden of responsibility. Sarah smiled warmly, placing a hand gently on his arm. "You bore that burden, Elias, and you saved us all. Willow Creek has a new calm now, a new beginning, and it's all thanks to you, and to the strength you found when it truly mattered." The town was indeed breathing again, not just with water, but with renewed hope and a profound understanding that some truths run deeper than science, and some heroes emerge from the most unexpected quiet corners. Elias had found his resolution, not in solitude, but in serving the community he loved, his quiet courage finally given its due. A gentle breeze, redolent with the fresh scent of blooming wildflowers and moist earth, rustled through the newly verdant trees of Willow Creek. The relentless drought, once a suffocating memory, had long receded, replaced by an abundance of clear, flowing water that invigorated every corner of the town. The old, dusty stream now gurgled with life, its banks lined with lush greenery, and the town square, once parched and forlorn, now boasted vibrant flower beds and a cheerful fountain, its spray sparkling in the abundant sunlight. Willow Creek had not merely recovered, it had undergone a profound transformation, blossoming into a truly vibrant, thriving community, as if experiencing a joyous second spring. The hushed anxieties that once plagued its residents had given way to an infectious optimism, a collective spirit of hope and resilience that permeated every interaction. At the heart of this rebirth, yet humbly unassuming as ever, was Elias Thorne. He still occasionally played his violin in the town square, but his melodies were now imbued with a light-hearted joy, reflecting the renewed spirit of Willow Creek. He no longer needed to play for coins. His presence was simply cherished, a living testament to the town's miraculous turnaround. While his quiet demeanor remained, it was now infused with a profound sense of purpose and a quiet, unshakable confidence. He had found his voice, not in grand speeches, but in the eloquent language of truth and the quiet strength of his unwavering integrity. Elias had embraced his newfound role as the town's guardian of water, but his influence extended far beyond just the spring. He had embarked on a mission, one rooted in his deep connection to the land and his desire to prevent future injustices. His relationship with Chief Chen, his quiet daughter, had deepened profoundly since the incident at the Daily Grind. The chief, no longer burdened by the secret of their connection, embraced a more open, nurturing role. She often visited Elias at his quiet cottage, not in uniform, but as a daughter sharing a cup of tea with her father, their conversations filled with warmth, shared understanding, and a mutual respect for their distinct yet complementary paths. The chief saw Elias's burgeoning passion for environmental stewardship as a continuation of their shared commitment to justice, albeit through different avenues. His once hidden talents were now openly celebrated. The principle of paying it forward became a tangible reality in Willow Creek, largely thanks to Elias and his newfound collaborator, Sarah Jenkins. Together, they established the Eldoria Water Wisdom Initiative, a community outreach program dedicated to fostering environmental awareness and sustainable living. The initiative, often run from a refurbished old mill by the revitalized stream, offered workshops on traditional water conservation methods, soil health, and the symbiotic relationship between human communities and the natural world. Elias, drawing on his profound inherited knowledge, taught the younger generations about dowsing, not as a parlor trick, but as a way to listen to the subtle energies of the earth, to understand its rhythms and needs. He emphasized the importance of respect for nature's delicate balance, teaching children how to identify healthy water sources and protect them from contamination. Sarah, leveraging her skills as a teacher, developed engaging curricula, translating Elias's ancient wisdom into accessible lessons for all ages. She taught practical skills for civic engagement, emphasizing the power of clear communication and factual presentation. Reminding everyone of the day a quiet old man spoke a simple truth that saved their town. The memory of the incident and Dr. Eris Thorne's dramatic downfall served as a potent, unspoken lesson etched into the collective consciousness of Willow Creek. People became acutely aware of how quickly unchecked ambition and avarice could lead to catastrophic consequences, and how easily a community could be swayed by false promises disguised as progress. The town now valued authenticity and deep-rooted knowledge over superficial charm and quick fixes. Mayor Robert Finch, deeply humbled by his past misjudgment, remained a steadfast leader, but his approach had undergone a complete overhaul. He became a passionate advocate for environmental sustainability and transparent governance, famously stating at every town meeting, "We must always listen to the quiet voices, for they often hold the deepest truths." He had learned his painful lesson and was now a true champion for the town's integrity and long-term well-being. The very physical heart of Willow Creek, the newly restored town square, stood as a living testament to the quiet strength that had prevailed. In the center of the square, where the dry fountain once stood, a beautiful new public well had been constructed. Its stone facade was adorned with subtle carvings of flowing water and the Eldorian spirals that Elias had once discovered on the ancient pipe. And on a small, unobtrusive pedestal beside the well, a gleaming brass plaque, paid for by the grateful community, proudly read, "The Eldoria Spring, a gift of truth, integrity, and harmony. May it flow for generations." It was a subtle, yet powerful reminder of the day a quiet violinist stood up to deceit, and a town rediscovered its true values and its own inherent resilience. On a sun-drenched Saturday morning, a gentle melody drifted across the town square. Elias Thorne sat on a newly installed bench beside the Eldoria Spring, his cherished violin cradled in his arms. He was teaching a group of eager children a simple, joyful tune, his gnarled fingers guiding their small hands over miniature instruments. Around his neck, the Star of Eldoria necklace, its deep blue gem now polished to a soft sheen, pulsed with a faint inner luminescence, worn openly, proudly, for all to see. Shadow, the black cat, now plump and healthy, dozed peacefully on his lap, a contented purr vibrating through Elias's body. Elias looked out at the bustling town, at the children laughing as they splashed their hands in the cool, clear water of the spring, at the lush trees swaying gently in the breeze. He glanced down at the gleaming star on his chest, then at Shadow, and finally, his gaze settled on a small group of young apprentices, diligently practicing their dowsing rods under Sarah Jenkins's watchful eye. A profound, serene smile spread across his face, a genuine expression of peace and fulfillment. He was no longer just a street performer. He was a guardian, a teacher, a living legend. Willow Creek had indeed found its second spring, a period of not just renewal, but a flourishing life built on truth, integrity, and the quiet, unwavering power of unseen heroes. His legacy, and the ancient wisdom he carried, would now flow as freely and abundantly as the spring itself, nourishing generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming narratives that delve into the profound human spirit and the power of unseen heroes. Thank you for joining us on this journey.